split in the sort of Trump base, and one wonders what that foretells for the upcoming midterms, which, of course, we're not a political newsletter, but politics certainly impacts energy, and so we keep an eye on it. If it weren't for the war drums in the Middle East, oil would be in the 50s. The energy markets are incredibly well supplied. There's an infinite amount of natural gas. We've got a piece that we're working on right now, tentatively titled Infinity Machines, kind of a follow-up to a really interesting story about floating liquefied natural gas vessels that was in the Financial Times on Sunday. Just that unlocks so much in the way of hydrocarbon resources. So, and then we have the war in Ukraine, negotiations today as we're recording this in Switzerland, I think Geneva maybe. And how that, if that comes to an end, we had just came off the end of the Munich Security Conference. I see Hillary Clinton has made her reappearance, and then of course tensions in China, Taiwan, and the economic war between the U.S. and China. So tons of stuff going on, lots to talk about. Happy to take it in any direction you wish to go, sir.
Yeah, well, as it relates to the Middle East, since that is certainly top of mind with, I feel like everyone these days would love to hear your latest thoughts.
I think, look, Trump is an interesting character. We saw what he did in Venezuela, which was, let's call it unconventional, to say the least, and to give Trump some credit. Unlike prior regime change operations, it doesn't seem like the U.S. has destroyed this country. Most of the government's still intact. They seem to be obviously singing a different tune as it pertains to collaborating with the U.S. But I saw that Christopher Wright was just in Venezuela, and Chevron has been making some relatively bullish comments about supply. And maybe Trump's gambit might just work. Certainly, so far at least, knock on wood for the people of Venezuela and for the people of the U.S., a far better outcome than what was observed in Libya, speaking of Hillary Clinton, and Iraq, and Somalia, and various other places that the U.S. has destroyed. And if that kind of an outcome could somehow be achieved in Iran, who would be opposed to it? We're no fans of the mullahs. But we suspect this is a different animal. The Chinese and the Russians are far, far more interested in defending the current regime in Iran than they were in Venezuela, and far closer to the action. Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere, just down the road from the U.S. refining coast. One could imagine that Beijing and Moscow decided they would just let that one go. There's not much they could do about it anyway. But Iran, there are things they can do about it. There are things they are doing about it. Russia has significant spy ships in the area. Sorry, China has significant spy ships in the area. Russia has been flying in various weaponry, positioning troops near Iran. So kind of the risk of World War III, we think World War III has been ongoing since 2014, but like a true clash of the superpowers, even more direct than what's going on in Ukraine. And the most amazing thing, just to sort of round it out, is we're talking in the office today about what a psyop this Guthrie case must be. I mean, turn on Fox News and the first 10 minutes of Fox and Friends is admittedly tragic missing person case in Arizona, but I don't know how this is worth the first 10 minutes of Fox News when we have potential for World War III going on in the Middle East, and makes you wonder what exactly is going on here. So, I know that's kind of a long stretch from the mullahs in Iran to Guthrie, but this is the world we live in. It's all on the same television. So, it's fascinating to see.
Well, I'm when I go to the gym, and that's about the only time I see what's going on, TV wise, and all I see is on each of the screens is the Guthrie incident. And, while I am still green to the space in terms of this alternative media and geopolitics and finance, I can't help but think this is a distraction. No doubt that's unfortunate. I mean, no one wants to have a loved one, et cetera, have this happen to, but I can't help but think of millions of other people that have the same thing going on, missing children even. And obviously
why this one? Yeah, right. I mean, why is this the one that we have to see every day? It's crazy.
And so much like, the Epstein files, I can't help but think this is serving as another means to, galvanize attention in one direction. Obviously, this has been going on for some time, and we don't need to necessarily go into a depth on this, but it is interesting. These when they release information, the times and dates they release this information, which I personally suspect there's some esoteric element to that, but it's very interesting, Doomberg.
Yeah, no, I mean, one wonders whether the Guthrie thing isn't a distraction from the release of those files. Don't look over here, look over there. I mean, it's not to belabor it, but yeah, literally the first 10 minutes every day, they go to commercial before they talk about the fact that Trump is about to declare war on Iran. One of those two stories is important. Obviously, I understand, as you say, it's a personal tragedy for the Guthrie family, but how many people were kidnapped on that same day that we'll never hear of? And is it less of a tragedy for them? Of course not. But World War III affects everybody. So yeah, it's just interesting to watch, especially you'd think in 2026, with alternative media, distributed media, social media saturation, that somehow these stories wouldn't still capture the national zeitgeist. But this one sure seems to. I personally don't understand why people are interested in it. Seems like a run-of-the-mill kidnapping to us.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I thought I'd touch on in that, and I'm finding as I cover different topics, even outside of the markets and geopolitics, and trying to understand kind of more power structures, that at least to me, and I'd love to hear your take on it. In that, I feel like a lot of people in this alternative field, whether that's finance outside of mainstream or geopolitics or fill in the blank, the state of society, that there is a great deal of people that are compromised, i.e., controlled opposition, and those who, try to expose the truth or try to understand what's going on. You are shadow banned. You are censored. You will not get the views, and so it is just not rewarded in this world. At least that's what I'm finding in my own personal experience. I don't know.
I would say that's the attractiveness of Substack, I think, because it's not really algorithm driven. It is merit driven. It's subscriber driven. And for now, at least, you have to have some substance to catch an audience, to keep an audience. Although I will say that I'm observing ever more AI slop on Substack. And for those of you who may be listening who are trying to make a go of it on social media or on Substack, and you're using AI and you think that people can't tell that you're lying to yourself. I mean, I read a relatively high-profile person's Substack, and I was like, why did they use AI to write this? It's quite obvious that they've used AI to write this. And I get it. It's a nice, easy hack. It comes out. It's perfect. It's edited. It's, but you can tell. And we believe authentically human is going to skyrocket. But to your question, on Substack at least, you have the opportunity to build trust with your audience. When we publish something, we published this morning, we published a piece called More Cowbell, fun title. Our audience knows and comes to expect that this was, written by humans, and we 100% believe whatever it is that we wrote when we hit send, which I think is an important brand attribute. We might be wrong. We might change our mind. We might be catastrophically wrong. But we're not trying to fool you. These are our views. Here's our homework. We defend those views in the comments. I'm personally in the comments on publication day, probably up until we get past about 200 or so. And we duke it out. If people give us feedback, great. Well, here's why we disagree. We often get great story ideas from our subscribers. They know there's an authentic team behind this work. Look, we use AI. Who doesn't use AI? It's part of our research and part of, check for typos, and it's no different than Grammarly and all this other stuff, but it's written by humans. The ideas are conceived by humans. It's written for humans. And so the algorithm today, when I go on Twitter, I use Twitter as inbound only. We don't post on Twitter anymore. But the amount of AI slop, and it's not just like the bots in the comments. I see big names. I'll give you an example. It's a big enough name that I'm sure he's not going to be listening to this, but General Michael Flynn, former national security advisor to Trump, put a post out. He's emotional about this Epstein stuff, and who could blame him? But post, in my mind, is so clearly written by AI. Like, why does he need to use AI to write a Twitter post? It's just kind of like unfortunate. And then the algorithm rewards that. Last thing I'll say, look, you're doing a podcast, and lots of people put their podcasts on YouTube. I don't know if you spend a lot of time on YouTube, but I do for pleasure. And I'm seeing more and more clearly AI-generated content, start to finish, that is almost certainly produced by Google. Google's boosting it in their algorithms, and they're getting more and more views that they can sell ads to where they don't have to share the ad money with the creators. It's very clear the direction of travel on YouTube. They will diminish Authentically Human and promote, Google Studios presents a look at why this home in the 1700s is super efficient compared to modern construction, and I think that's a mistake. Like, I think a social media platform that prioritizes that, which is Authentically Human, will have humans gravitate towards it. You're not selling ads so that AI can see your ads. You're selling ads so that humans can see your ads. And so, I don't know, but kind of a long answer, but I think a lot about this space, obviously, because I make my living in it now, and we see these disturbing trends.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating, but I think it'll be rewarding in the long term. I think for those who put themselves out there, and I suspect a lot of these white collar jobs, are going to be usurped by automation more or less. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. I thought I'd add, going back to kind of the geopolitical arena going on, could you share your latest thoughts perhaps on Europe, particularly Ukraine and or these protests that we hear a lot about in the UK?
Yeah, so Europe is in a bad position geopolitically, energetically, industrially, and politically. Really fascinating report by the Republicans in Congress, obviously politically biased. You could accuse that report of being, but laid bare the overt election interference on the part of Brussels in various European countries. Romania, quite obviously, was a completely stolen election. But they interfered in Norway, and Britain, and Britain's not in the EU, and neither is Norway, but they're European countries, important European countries. Wherever there's an election, EU is trying to put their thumb on the scale, and we have a big one coming in Hungary here. Viktor Orban, the perennial thorn in the side of the Brussels elite, is up for re-election. It's in fight for his political survival. And so we'll see how that goes. It's in early April. Note with interest that Rubio went to Slovakia and Hungary after leaving Munich, the two countries that are the most opposed to the European Union. You get the sense that the Trump administration has little use for the European Union. The EU is in a tough spot. The blob of the EU, which we just wrote about, again this morning, we talked about the 20th sanctions package because the first 19 were so effective. And we note with interest, which was the point of the piece this morning, that they're not sanctioning yet still the Russian state-owned nuclear company Rosatom because of its critical role in keeping the lights on in Europe. Europe is at once in some form of confrontation with Russia, China, the U.S., and even for a while India. Like, what are you guys thinking? So it's in a downward spiral. One wonders how that spiral breaks. There's a new party in Britain, and again, Britain is basically back in the EU. I think Stammer has backdoored Britain back into the European fold. There's a new party that just launched in Britain to some controversy. I don't know if you've seen it. Reform UK, is it? Oh no, Restore UK. Sorry, Restore UK. Very much a hard line on immigration and the need to reverse immigration, not just slow it. Very much sort of a Trumpian appeal. And this person has sort of come out of nowhere, at least us, and seems to be taking support away from Nigel Farage's reform, which makes one wonder what's really going on. Just because they have a first-past-the-post system in Britain, maybe the whole point of this is to dilute the protest vote so that the incumbent parties maintain their current position in power. But we see the same thing in France. Le Pen, lawfare against Le Pen. The Romanian election was stolen. The obvious objective to try to get Hungary, a regime change in Hungary. And then to your point about the war in Ukraine, it's fascinating to see what's the end game for Europe. They don't want the war to end. Russia just keeps blowing up Ukrainian infrastructure. The people of Ukraine are suffering terribly. We've consistently said that these attacks on the Ukrainian civilian electricity infrastructure, you could call them dual use. I think it's not a close call. It's a war crime. But here we are, and what's the path to victory? We listen to Kaya Kallas say that Russia is not winning the war. Well, who's winning the war? If Russia's not winning, I suppose it's her view that Ukraine is winning, or that it's a stalemate. If it's a stalemate, then why the urgency around getting a ceasefire? Last thing I'll say, the propaganda is just incredible around the whole issue. I saw the British propaganda is the worst. A British report that said that the kill rate, Russian soldiers are killed 27 times more often as Ukrainian soldiers. In other words, Ukraine is killing Russian soldiers at a rate of 27-1, and yet Russia's going to march on Paris. There's so many contradictions in the propaganda that's just amazing. So, Europe, until Europe gets its energy house in order, it's just going to continue on this spiral. And we're going to see various political movements, reactionary, right-leaning, populist political movements rise up, and the existing elite power brokers will try their best to whack a few moles and stretch things out as long as they can. Not a happy situation.
What might your response be to those who hold the position that this is kayfabe, that this is WWE/theatrics, that it's not intended to be one per se, just maybe kind of like a Vietnam, as I've heard another mention, or our time in the Middle East, where it's just intended to reduce human life and to extract resources, etc. I'd love to hear perhaps your take on that, if you could share that with the audience.
Yeah, that's a cynical worldview. Unfortunately, sometimes such cynicism is warranted. We studied this war a lot. We went down this war in the rabbit hole that it is because we wanted to understand its likely outcome and how it might impact the energy markets. I personally probably spent an hour a day studying the various open source mapping projects and reading, the propaganda on both sides. And it's really been an insightful journey about the nature of propaganda itself. So if you look at the Russian stated objectives, which have not wavered since before the war started in 2022, one of the major objectives of the Russian side is to demilitarize Ukraine, and in particular a certain faction within Ukraine that has a certain ideology, or so the Russians claim. And one of the ways to demilitarize a country is to kill all its soldiers. And so people are measuring this war in land captured. Well, if you're fighting a war of attrition, and one of your objectives is to eliminate the military capabilities of your neighbor, then you don't necessarily need to occupy the land. You might not even want to occupy the land. They have a state objective of liberating what they call the 4 regions, and they use the word liberating. Ukraine would say it's an invasion. I'm choosing my words carefully because I understand that there are 2 sides to this war. And I frankly have no strong views on either side. It's not my war. And so Russia is happy to have a slow-moving front line where, they are attriting away the Ukrainian weapons and service people and planes, air defense systems, and so on. Barely a week goes by where you don't see a drone footage of what looks like a Patriot missile system being blown up by an Iskander missile from the Russian side. And so, to your point, the real cynical view is both sides are happy to throw humans into the meat grinder so they could sell more bombs. I suppose history teaches that's way more common than we would like to believe. It's a sad commentary on humanity in this age that's still going on, but it's hard to deny that people are getting very rich off this war, and it's not the soldiers on both sides who are dying in the trenches, sometimes literal trenches, according to some of these videos that we watch. So I think, look, the biggest loser in all of this are the people of Ukraine, and then the second biggest losers are the soldiers of Russia who've died. I mean, there's been significant casualties on both sides, so a lot of argument about just how significant those casualties are. But it's a disaster. War's terrible. War is always a racket. All wars are a racket. That's why we're opposed to them. This war in Iran would be a racket. I don't understand by what justification Trump is going to go to war with Iran, and I think he'll lose his base. He's lost his base in many ways. It's fascinating to see. So, is what it is. War is always there. It's rather unfortunate, but such is life.
Yeah, tangentially, I have been spending the past couple of months more or less both talking to guests regarding kind of the makeup of the power structure, yeah, as well as just kind of looking at it throughout history. And I'll just comment and say that nothing is, it appears what it seems to be, what's put out there. And I'll also add that I've had on guests, been fortunate to have on some great guests, some names out there, and I'm actually candidly surprised sometimes the positions they hold it on certain things. Like they might be really good, let's say in the financial markets, but then when it comes to other topics, it's like it's totally lacking. It's something out of 1950s propaganda.
Yeah, it's fascinating you say that. So one of the things we've been studying is prediction markets. Polymarket is the one that we sort of use the most. I don't have a Polymarket account. I'm pretty sure it's not legal for me to have one in my state, so I try to follow the laws. But we see huge inefficiencies in those markets, and I think it's because the markets are underdeveloped and there's not a lot of volume, and it's not totally financialized by Wall Street yet. People are shepherded into these propaganda silos such that they just can't see what's probably going to happen. And look, it's both of our jobs to be on the internet all day. If you're working a 9-to-5 job and you've got office politics, and you've got the events that you got to get the kids to after work, and you casually catch a headline on Fox News and the only thing they show you is, this Guthrie case, you can understand why you might flip through The Economist and think that that's in any way resembles reality. And so when you have guests on who have deep expertise in certain areas that they pay attention to, and then they pivot out of it. I mean, I think a famous example is, we'll just whisper it and maybe nobody will hear, is Peter Zeihan whenever he's talking about energy, at least from our perspective, like I find him interesting. I find him entertaining. I enjoy his demographics work, but whenever he talks about energy, I kind of like, roll my eyes a little bit. And I'm sure people think that about stuff that we put out when we don't talk about energy and we adventure into other topics. But it is fascinating to us, you could see the propaganda silos manifest in what we think are poorly priced prediction market bet contracts. Like when we first highlighted it, like Keir Starmer surviving through 2026 as prime minister was trading at 50 cents. And there's no way he makes it to 2027. British propaganda is the worst. And so who knows what's being told to the people of Britain, and maybe the current contract volume is disproportionately impacted by people in Britain who suffer from terrible propaganda. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, Yuki, so you covered a bunch of things that I'd love to touch on. I mean, you alluded to, I'm assuming ultimately the city of London. You hear, I feel like I hear that so much from different guests, and then you hear, it's interesting to hear people's take, and then they say, no, it's Vatican, or it's DC, and all these. Everyone's got their own take in it. It seems no one is in agreement, but I guess everyone is in agreement in that things are not as they appear, and I think that's I feel blessed not to. I'll just go off on a quick tangent here, but I feel grateful to just be able to just have the time to go down some of these rabbit holes and get exposed to things, because again, as I mentioned earlier, Doomberg, it's amazing how many people are totally bereft of it. And to your point, you go to work, you take the kids to, to school, et cetera. Then you see the Savannah Guthrie's, mother thing on Fox, incessantly nonstop. And, you're not aware of these alternative points of view that are going on. It seems, maybe if you're on X, and obviously that's with its caveats, but certain accounts you can just kind of get exposed and just start thinking of different things. But yeah, and at least to me, yeah, there's a, in light of censorship and such. Go ahead.
No, so you pulled on something. So, some people say the Vatican, some people say it's London. I watched this YouTube channel, Prometheus Thinking or whatever, where she claims that Britain explains all the bad things that's ever happened to Trump, and Trump is at war with MI6, and there's some it's interesting. I watch it sometimes. Just this is why we use mental models, right? So. We have no emotional attachment to the correctness of an axiom. It either works and explains things and predicts things, or it doesn't. And if it works well to explain things or predicts things, we'll use it. Hey, Peru is the center of power in the world. Okay, as an operating mental model, does that work? Does it explain what's recently happened, and does it predict what will happen? Well, obviously no. So we can discard Peru as the center of power in the world, but London as the center of power in the Western-based traditional financial system, a little harder to dismiss, although it's not really operative in our view, but still interesting enough to listen to. We have a mental model that we believe explains Washington quite well right now. So, for example, we think in a secret ballot, 80% of Congress would vote to impeach and remove Trump. There's no such thing as Republicans in Washington. They wear jersey with an R on it, and the other side wears a jersey with a D on it, and then when they're done acting, they all get together and split up all the money they've stolen from taxpayers, and I don't think that's overtly cynical. Do you think the Republican side is any less corrupt than the Democrat side? Of course not. Perhaps even more so, given their ties to the military-industrial complex. So I think it's just wrong to wonder on Twitter, and I see this on sort of right-wing Twitter. We have various lists, and I watch left-wing and right-wing, although you got to go to Blue Sky to catch most of the left-wing stuff now. On right-wing Twitter, it's like, why won't the Republicans break the filibuster? There's no such thing as Republicans. The last thing they want to do is break the filibuster. They're never going to break the filibuster. They don't want to see Trump's agenda passed. It's not that hard. Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer are buddies. They're on the same team. Stop pretending like because Mitch McConnell has an R next to his name that he's going to somehow vote to secure our elections. God bless Mike Lee for trying, but they're not going to break the filibuster to pass the SAVE Act. It's just not going to happen because they're not Republicans. By the way, if you had a secret ballot, the SAVE Act would fail 65-35. But a third of Republicans would vote against it. If they knew nobody would know that they voted against it, they just don't care about the things that they pretend to care about when they're running for office. I don't know what happens when you go to Washington, but my observation is that the closer you are to local politics, the more true the candidates remain to their stated positions that they run on. So your county versus your state, and then your state versus, your representatives that go to Washington. Once people go to Washington, it's like they go to a different universe. And so Trump is doing the precise opposite of doing the opposite on a lot of really important issues that he ran on. And I can just tell you, I live in a flyover country. The enthusiasm for Trump is wildly diminished. And the subset of candidates who are on their jerseys are going to get wiped out in the next midterms if something doesn't change, especially if war breaks out in Iran and it doesn't go well.
Well, I have personally evolved from the left-right paradigm to realizing, nope, they're all the same. That's why I actually don't plan on voting anymore. I think it's fruitless. I had Chris McIntosh on the show last week, and he mentioned about, what's the point of voting in some of these Western nations, this illusory notion that your vote counts. It's like this plantation where you get to choose the candidates have already been carved out for you. When if you go to Dubai or you go to one of these other countries, yeah, they don't have a, quote unquote democracy or what have you, but at least they're competing with you as it relates to, the capital. You can choose to move your money out or in. They want to compete and satiate you as a, I don't know, whatever the term is, citizen or whatever they call it over there. And so to your point, locally I'll vote. Maybe if there's something going on with my HOA, I'll vote, but I don't have any intention on voting for governor here in California or, the U.S. down the road. I think it's almost a fool's errand.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously two sides of that argument. I certainly sympathize with your view. I'm personally not there yet. Still vote, and because on the ballot is local elections, and so as long as you're there, you may as well color in a few boxes. But yeah, I mean, the thing that amazes me is just how few people can internalize. Like, it's very clear the Republicans don't want to break the filibuster, and they know the Democrats are going to break the filibuster after 2026. It's clear as day what's going to happen, and then they obviously, by not doing anything to stop it, they must support it. It's the only logical explanation. And so when we studied Washington, of course, again, we have to study Washington for the future of energy policy. And, we'll see. Look at Trump, of course, has followed through on many of his campaign commitments, too. And this endangerment finding, his energy policies we largely support. Even the way in which he did Venezuela, as I mentioned earlier, at least it's different. It's an attempt at something different. Of course, I think, to be absolutely clear, wildly illegal. Utterly at odds with international law. International law is over. The United Nations might as well dissolve. And then also what's going on in Cuba, I think, is it's an undeclared war. I mean, a blockade is an act of war. The U.S. is blockading Cuba. And God, Lord knows that country and its citizens have suffered long enough. Let's hope that whatever emerges from this undeclared war with Cuba, that at least the people who live there will have a chance at a better life.
No doubt. And, speaking of a better life and a quality of life, I just saw something. I don't know if it was CNBC or one of these mainstream articles posted it, but they said there's a lot of Americans selling their plasma to make ends meet. And I just saw that yesterday, and I just thought, wow.
Yeah, inequality is a real issue, and it's unfortunately, I think, going to be exacerbated by AI. Like I've seen, you've seen the doomsday AI stuff. It is scary what we see in our own private investing. We're involved in a couple of AI startups, but it is transformational. It's going to, upend a lot of careers. You got to get ahead of it. You can't be blindsided by it. The tools of AI do make experts better, but to your point, I think it drives a huge amount of inequality as well. Fortunate enough to have a business that generates enough revenue that allows us to afford to interact with AI tools to make our business better, to increase our revenue, but I don't need any more of the pie. I'd like more of the pie, but I don't need more of the pie, but I don't have to, sell my blood to make ends meet. But I worry about my children. I worry about their friends. I worry about new college grads. I worry about, a whole lot of white collar workers who are going to be put out of work here soon. It's going to be, an incredible transition for sure.
Do you see, as I have heard some speculate, that we may only have a handful of years before automation, I'm hearing people use the term mechanized slavery, this AI, where it gets to a point where things are so bifurcated that people are locked into their socioeconomic class. Like right now, obviously there's mobility. Some may still argue, but that it will become invariably more challenging, almost like a feudal system, maybe in the next 10 to 15 years, hypothetically.
Yeah, I don't know what the future holds. It's changing so fast, it's really hard to model. We tried our best. We did a doom zoom on AI, just thoughts, from our own learning journey. You have Musk saying everyone's just going to thrive on universal basic income. I mean, what a nightmare that would be. You take away the human need to work, to excel, to improve, to accomplish, and what's left can be pretty scary. At the same time, we do see a lot of hyperbole. Our CEO of one of our portfolio companies, who's knee deep in AI, reminds me that this is nothing more than Anthropic and OpenAI trying to, convince regulators to stop everyone else from developing, because if regulations are imposed and they get to write them, then they're just going to write in their own moats. So they're pulling up the ladders, and keeping all the spoils of AI development for themselves. That's the cynical view of some of these, fear-mongering stories that you see go viral on Twitter. But having worked with AI, used cutting-edge stuff, it is, amazing. I'm sure you've done some work with AI as well. It's scary just how good it is, how good it's getting. And I think the scariest part is the pace of improvement. And so, when I first read Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near in the mid-2000s, you read the first chapter and you put the book down, you're like, whoa. He made a point in this book which stuck with me clearly, because I remember it now, which is that, the doubling time of technology is shrinking, and soon it will be a day. In other words, the technology capabilities will double every day. And, the lily pads in a pond analogy, it doesn't take too many doubles before you cover the whole pond. That's the definition of singularity, of course, as Kurzweil defined it. And the doubling time of AI capabilities is down to weeks, from months and from years before that, and then decades before that. And we are truly at a point where the pace of change is staggering. It hasn't been that long since ChatGPT blew up onto the scene. It's only in a couple of years. But just think about the whole ecosystem of tools available. Claude, Anthropic, the two Groks. It's just amazing. It's scary. And even the small startups that were involved in it, what they're able to pull off with hardly any money at all. It's mind-blowing. And it makes you wonder just how big companies that just aren't wired for this are going to survive. They're not going to survive. I could tell you, I won't give too many details, but we're negotiating something. And we're interacting with a large, well-known entity. And they just don't operate at our speed. We're a very small team. We're quick, we're nimble. We think of something, piece gets written, research right, edit, fact check, publish, promote, and defend a piece every 4 days. You have to be fast. You have to be nimble. You can't, go through layers and layers of legal checks. And the glacial speed that we've experienced collaborating with this relatively large firm is just you all people, all of you are going to be out of work soon. This is just not how the economy is going. Could you even hear yourself? Well, it'll be a few weeks before we get back. A few weeks. I don't know. It's staggering, scary. I spent a lot of time worrying about my children and what it means for them. But on the flip side, I suppose our parents probably felt the same way.
I wanted to, in light of time, also touch on something that we kind of highlighted a little bit earlier, and that was pertaining to whether or not your vote counts and the ineffectiveness of republics versus maybe having a strong man in power. What is your take on it, if you care to share? I mean, do you think that we need to have somebody who's like, you know what, you need to hand me like a Cincinnati, you need to hand me the powers. I will completely, drain the deep, this deep politics that exists globally. We're going to, do what we did to Carthage. We're going to raise it to the ground, everything. But you need to give me the powers. Do we need something like that to fix this? What is your take?
I hope not. I mean, I hope not, because who are you going to trust with those powers? Again, I'm almost too cynical. First thing I think of when I see this new party emerging in Britain, Restore UK or Restore Britain or whatever it's called, is that this is the government's attempt to get everybody on a list. Like, who's donating to this party? Great. Now you've all been accused of hate crimes, right? We'll arrest you. I don't know that it can be fixed from within. So to your question, then, if you can't fix it from within, then maybe you need, such a revolution. We've long said that on the journey from abundance to starvation is riot, first political riot, and then when that doesn't work, physical riots. And so, are we truly entering fourth turning? What does that look like? And is that a political singularity where you can't really know what happens on the other side? That's why I started by saying I hope not, because that's the kind of experiment that usually ends badly. Rarely is the hero that saves the system benign. But what choice does one have? It's clear, as you say. I mean, voting's not going to do it. I could tell you, I've studied the Trump phenomenon, of course. How could you not? He's one of the most interesting people of our time. I just don't think that's arguable. You might hate him, you might love him, but he's interesting. And I happened to be in an area where he held a rally before the election. And I tried to explain this to my more liberal-leaning friends. Like, don't underestimate this man. And his ability to connect with blue-collar rural voters is just unparalleled. You might think it's idiotic. You might think it doesn't make any sense, that he's clearly a liar and he's tricking them, and he's in the files, all this stuff, whatever. It's fine. But just go and viscerally experience it. I didn't go to the rally. I just wanted to be around it, just feel. Sometimes in life you just go in first person and you get a feel for a situation. Like, what's the vibe? And the man turned out Bubba. Like, Bubba was for Trump, and Bubba's been let down. And Bubba's angry. Trump was kind of the hope for Bubba. He's fumbled the ball in their eyes. And the vibe shift is remarkable. So we'll see, maybe a small sample size, who knows, my own biases are coming in, but I can tell you it's a completely different vibe than what I personally observed prior to the election.
Yeah, no, same here. Yeah, I've completely divorced myself from, subscribing and being a part of this narrative that they want us all to. I just think it's like here are the candidates, and then it's controlled. I know it sounds very, very out there, but
well, maybe we should end on a more positive note.
Yeah.
I do think that start with what you can control: your home, your own behavior, your own accomplishments, your own business, your own family, your friends, and work your way out from there, back to local versus national. I see the billions and billions and billions being stolen from the Treasury, but that doesn't mean that I can't make positive change in my community for thousands. And that's over there. This is right here in front of me, sort of proximity effect. And so, I like to say that pride of ownership is a foundational attribute of a responsible provider, for example. Like, clean your garage, put away the stuff that needs to be put away. Do a little spring cleaning, and have that extra meal with your kid, and try to impart some wisdom. Control what you can control. We can't control London politics, whether Xi Jinping is a more effective leader because he has totalitarian control. But you can control your house, the parent you are, the friend you are, and coworker you are, and probably just not a bad idea to just start there.
Absolutely, and I'll add to that, because I know I was on a negative binge there, and I've been trying to do that more personally. Like, okay, I need to, because I'm around it all the time. I think a lot of us are. So yeah, I think in light of the challenges that we have going on, I'd still rather live in this period in time than any other, with respect to access to resources, and quality of life. So it's all a trade-off to some extent. But yeah, I think life is good overall. You can have a great life despite whatever is going on around you, and do what you can do, enhance your personal sovereignty, I guess.
Yeah, look, I
So
mean, we got no. It's not like we could live in a different time. These are the cards we've been handed, my friend. So let's play them to the best of our ability. Christian, it's been great. Always enjoy our conversations.
absolutely. How can people learn more about you and get in touch with you, Doomberg?
Yeah, everything at Doomberg.com. And if you want to break from all things social media, you can also check out our sister publication, Classics Read Aloud, which exists to curate and bring back to life some of the best works of literature. The exact opposite of the AI-driven slop that you see over social media. So this is sort of stands in defiance to that. Great little project